Somewhere right now, someone is opening a beer. Someone else is pouring a glass of wine. Someone is mixing a cocktail in a steel shaker, measuring spirits with a jigger, garnishing with a twist of lemon peel. The ritual is so embedded in human social life that most people never stop to ask where it came from. It came from very, very far back. The oldest evidence of intentional alcohol production dates to approximately 9,000 years ago in China. A fermented mixture of rice, honey, and fruit found in pottery vessels at a site called Jiahu. But that is almost certainly not where it started. That is simply where the pottery survived. The act of fermenting things, of deliberately letting sugar turn into alcohol, almost certainly predates agriculture itself. Which means humans were getting drunk before they were farming, before they had cities, before they had writing, before almost everything we consider civilization. Alcohol did not appear after human culture. Alcohol helped build it. And the story of how our ancestors made it, what they made it from, why they drank it, and what happened to them when they did, is one of the strangest, most human stories in the entire archaeological record. It involves overripe fruit, accidental chemistry, religious ecstasy, political power, and the stubborn refusal of every human civilization that has ever existed to stay sober. Not one, not a single human culture ever discovered, across every continent and every era, has chosen to live without alcohol. Think about that for a moment. Before we talk about what ancient humans drank, we need to understand what they discovered. Because the invention of alcohol was not an invention at all, it was an observation. Fermentation is not a human technology. It is a natural process that happens whether you want it to or not. Wild yeast, single-celled fungi that exist everywhere, floating in the air, living on the skin of every fruit, consume sugars and produce two waste products, carbon dioxide and ethanol, alcohol. This happens automatically whenever sugar-rich material sits in the right conditions for long enough. Overripe fruit fermenting on the ground produces alcohol. A honeycomb left in a hollow tree fills with a mild alcoholic liquid. A mixture of grain and water left in a warm place will begin to ferment within days without any human intervention whatsoever. Your ancient ancestors did not invent this. They found it. And then they started doing it on purpose. The most likely origin story is this. Early humans, like virtually every other primate, actively sought out overripe and fermenting fruit. Chimpanzees do this today. They will bypass fresh fruit to eat fermented fruit, will return to the same spots to find it, and show observable behavioral changes. Relaxation, reduced aggression, increased sociability after consuming it. The attraction to mild intoxication is not a human quirk. It is a primate inheritance. But at some point, a human made a cognitive leap that no other primate has made. They didn't just find fermented food. They made it. They put things in containers. They added water. They waited. And when they came back, what they had was not accidental. It was deliberate. It was the first brewery. The variety of what ancient humans fermented is genuinely staggering. Every culture that ever existed found something local to turn into alcohol. If it contained sugar and you left it alone long enough, someone, somewhere, figured out how to drink it. Grain. The relationship between beer and civilization is so close that archaeologists have seriously debated which came first. Did humans settle down to farm grain for food, or to farm grain for beer? The evidence from sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, one of the oldest known monumental structures on Earth, built around 11,500 years ago, includes large stone vessels that appear to have been used for brewing. The people who built those massive stone circles may have been motivated, at least in part, by the need to produce alcohol for communal feasts. The first cities were grain cities, and grain cities made beer. Ancient Sumerian beer was thick, cloudy, full of grain sediment, consumed through long reed straws to filter out the solids. Workers building the pyramids in Egypt received daily beer rations as part of their wages, not as a bonus, as currency, as nutrition. Ancient beer was low in alcohol, but high in calories and B vitamins. It was closer to liquid bread than to what you'd recognize as beer today. Honey, mead, fermented honey and water, is almost certainly the oldest deliberately produced alcoholic drink in human history. Honey is essentially a sugar solution with natural preservatives, and when diluted with water and exposed to wild yeast, it ferments rapidly and reliably. Archaeological evidence of mead production goes back at least 9,000 years in China. In Northern Europe, mead was the drink of warriors, of kings, of gods. The Norse mead hall was the center of political and social life. Oaths were sworn over mead. Alliances were sealed with mead. The dead were honored with mead poured on the ground. The Norse mead hall was the center of political and social life. Oaths were sworn over mead. Alliances were sealed with mead. The dead were honored with mead poured on the ground. Fruit. Wine from grapes appears in the archaeological record around 8,000 years ago in Georgia in the Caucasus region. But fruit wines were almost certainly made from whatever grew locally. Dates in Mesopotamia, figs in the Middle East, berries in Northern Europe, plums in China. Ancient wine was nothing like what you find in a bottle today. It was thick, often sweetened with honey, heavily spiced with resins and herbs and whatever aromatic materials were available. The Greeks mixed their wine with seawater. The Romans added lead acetate, a sweet-tasting compound that is, incidentally, extremely toxic, to their wine as a preservative and sweetener. The Roman upper class may have suffered from chronic lead poisoning in part because of their wine habits. Agave. In Mesoamerica, where grapes did not grow and grain agriculture developed later, the indigenous peoples fermented the sap of the agave plant into a milky, slightly fizzy drink called pulque. The Aztecs had complex laws governing who could drink pulque and when. The elderly could drink freely. Young warriors could not. Getting drunk publicly without authorization was a serious offense. Alcohol was not just a social lubricant. It was a controlled substance, distributed and regulated by the state. Chicha. In South America, the primary fermented drink was chicha, made from maize. The traditional preparation method involved chewing the corn to break down starches with salivary enzymes, then spitting the chewed mass into a vessel to ferment. The saliva did what malting does in modern brewing. It activated the enzymes needed for fermentation. Chicha was made by women, stored by women, and considered a sacred substance. The Inca used it in every ritual, every ceremony, every political negotiation. To refuse chicha was a serious diplomatic insult. Modern people drink for relaxation, for social ease, for celebration. Ancient humans drank for all of those reasons, but they also drank for reasons that modern people rarely think about. It was safe to drink. This is the most important reason that almost nobody mentions. For most of human history, clean water was extraordinarily difficult to find and maintain. Groundwater near settlements was contaminated with human and animal waste. Rivers downstream of population centers were biological hazards. Boiling water requires fuel, containers, and time. Fermented beverages, by contrast, are naturally resistant to many pathogens. The alcohol content, even the relatively low alcohol content of ancient beer and wine, kills many of the bacteria that made water lethal. Drinking beer was not an indulgence. For much of human history, it was the safer option. Children drank it. The elderly drank it. It was served at breakfast. It was medicine. Almost every ancient medical tradition used alcohol as a base for herbal remedies and as a treatment in its own right. Ancient Egyptian medical papyri list beer and wine as ingredients in hundreds of prescriptions. Hippocrates, the father of Greek medicine, recommended wine for fever, for wound cleaning, for digestive complaints, for menstrual pain. In ancient China, medicated wines combining alcohol with herbs were the primary delivery system for pharmaceutical compounds. Alcohol dissolves many plant compounds that water cannot, making herbal medicines more effective. It also provided genuine pain relief in a world with no other analgesics. It was religious. Across virtually every ancient religious tradition, alcohol played a central ceremonial role. The Greek god Dionysus was literally the god of wine. His cult involved ritual intoxication as a form of communion with the divine. The idea that the altered state of consciousness produced by alcohol was a state closer to the gods than ordinary waking life. In ancient Mesopotamia, beer was offered to the gods daily in temples. In the Vedic tradition of ancient India, a fermented drink called soma was described as a god itself, a liquid deity that granted visions and connected worshippers to the divine. The Christian tradition of communion wine continues a long lineage of ritual alcohol use that goes back far beyond Christianity. Getting drunk was not just fun. It was, in many traditions, sacred. It was political. The ability to produce and distribute alcohol was a form of power. In ancient societies, hosting a feast, providing food and drink for a large group, was one of the primary ways leaders demonstrated their status and cemented loyalty. The chieftain who could offer the best mead, the most beer, the most wine, was the chieftain people followed. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric Europe shows that certain sites were used for large-scale feasting events, and that alcohol production at these sites was enormous, far beyond what any individual household would need. Power was exercised through generosity with drink. Here's where we land. Alcohol is not a modern vice imported into an otherwise sober human history. It is older than agriculture. It is older than writing. It is woven into the foundations of human civilization so deeply that it is genuinely impossible to imagine what human culture would look like without it. The temples were built by people who drank. The laws were written by people who drank. The gods were worshipped with drink. The alliances were sealed with drink. The dead were honored with drink. The sick were treated with drink. The children were kept safe from contaminated water by drink. Your relationship with alcohol, whatever it is the latest chapter in a story that began before your species had cities, before it had writing, before it had the wheel. The urge that sends someone to a refrigerator for a cold beer at the end of a long day is the same urge that sent a Neolithic human back to the same hollow tree where they found fermenting fruit last season. The chemistry is different. The vessel is different. The setting is wildly different. The impulse is exactly the same, and it is at least 9,000 years old. Probably much older. Every civilization that ever rose on this planet found something to ferment, and every single one of them, without exception, decided that what came out was worth keeping. That's all for today. Please donate or subscribe to fund the next video.